In this video, we're going to take a look at the Lantern interface. So you know what all of this stuff does, and you can make your project as efficiently as possible. So we'll just go from left to right with the tabs across the top here. So this is the Welcome tab, and here's where you put the your project name. And so this is the name of the directory where your project is going to get dumped out to when you build it, and it's going to be under the Lantern. Wherever you have Lantern installed, it's going to build it under there. So so that's the output directory for your project name. Here's your welcome message. You should have your name there as the author. And then for the output file, it doesn't really matter what you call it, but I think there's some restrictions on the length for the old system's having, whatever. If I didn't put a length on the restriction on there, then it's good. If you are going to put a title screen on your Apple II game, you can pick that here. That just needs to be a 280 by 192 black and white bitmap. And we're not going to do C64 in class or Spectrum stuff. But if you are a C64 person or a Spectrum person, then you know what this stuff means down here. All right, so let's go over to the next tab here. So this is where all your rooms and objects and NPCs are. So all of the objects that you added into your map should be over here in the left. So now you may see that, like, if you had a dark cave, but here it's got an underscore in it. Every object has two names. There's the name that gets printed, so there's dark cave, and then there's the ID name, or that's the name that shows up in the code. So how did I do that? So the name up here is what gets printed. The name down here is what you use in the code. And that's because names or variables can't have spaces in them. Object names can't have spaces in them in the code. When you print stuff out, yeah, it can have spaces, sure. But when you're writing code, you have to use this name down here, the object ID name. And it even tells you that, the unique name used to refer to this object. And then we have all of the connections for that object. Interesting. Why? Cardboard box. Are these all good? Yeah, these are good. Yep. Back of cave. Yep. So you can configure how your object is connected to other rooms. You can set the properties on those objects, whether you can see in there, whether it's a container or supporter, like whether you can pick it up, whether it's a locked door and stuff like that. So, and then importantly, the parent object, like where this thing is in the world. So if you want to put something in the player's inventory, you can move that to the player. If you've got something in your game that needs to go in a desk or a chest of drawer, a treasure chest or something, then you can move that here. So here's like a rubber ball, and you can see that right now it's in the player's inventory, but if I want to put it in the desk, I can just select desk. So now that rubber ball is in the desk, but let me put it back in the player. There we go. So, all right, so moving along, verbs. There's a whole list of built-in verbs that Lantern knows about, but you can add more. You can add your own verbs in here. And if you want to have synonyms for your verbs, like you have two verbs that are the same thing, just separate them with a comma. So here's where you can add your verbs. Now, when you add a verb, you need sometimes to validate how that verb gets used. So that is when you use these check functions. So we're on the tab for verb checks. So notice if I try to drop something, there's a check here. It says I have to supply at least one noun, and I have to have noun one. So I have to try to drop something, right? So when I try to drop something, I have some checks on this verb that control how that verb gets used. So there's a whole bunch of checks here that you can add onto your verbs. So when you add a verb, you probably want to add a check to it. You can also add checks to see, like, so in this game, I've got some spell casting. So when I try to say a magic word, I need to check if the player has the wand. So I think, do I have lumos as a verb in here somewhere? Lumos, right? So when I try to lumos something, I do the wand check. And that says, hey, if the wand's location isn't the player, you need your wand for that, right? And then stop, right? So I've made a little function that validates that verb. It says, hey, you're not using that verb right, or the conditions for you to use that verb have not been met. So, and this is where you handle things like there's a monster that won't let you leave the room. That this is you're validating. These verb checks are there for you to validate what you're trying to do. All right, and then let's go look at sentences. So sentences are mappings. Sentences map commands that the user types to functions that carry out some action. So sentences and functions go together here. So functions are where you're going to write the code. These are the building blocks of your program. The functions are going to carry out something when the player types a command. And the sentence tab is where you map a set of inputs that the player types, a set of words the player is going to type to a function that you wrote. So here I have got give rubber ball to Kraken, right? So there's a Kraken and you got to give it a rubber ball or throw a rubber ball for him, right? So I've got a function called give ball to Kraken, right? There's that over here somewhere it's over here in the list. Give ball to Kraken. There it is. There's the code for that. And when the player types give the rubber ball to the Kraken, then it's going to call that function. So sentences are mappings of words the player types to functions that are going to actually change something in your game, are going to respond to that. So sentences are wired up to functions. Sentences are they map commands the player types to the code that processes that in your game. And then we have something called events. Events are kind of a type of function. Events are functions that run every turn, regardless of what the player types. And these are used to do things like make NPCs appear, or if there's something that happens in your game on turn 50, or then there's an earthquake and some passages change. That's where you would do this too. You'd say, you'd write an event that says, okay, if it's turn 50, then print this and then reconfigure the exits, right? So events are where you put housekeeping functions that check to see what's going on in your game. And they're not wired up to anything that the player types. The events run every time the player successfully enters a command. So this is where you do things like, you run down batteries, or you have a timer that counts down. You're checking to see if the game is over, if your game has a time limit. Or you're making NPCs appear. Or if you want an NPC to attack the player if that NPC is in the room. Now, it's worth noting here, Lantern has got tons of snippets that it can drop in, little code wizards to help you write code. So if you go to one of these functions, hang on, I'm going to click cancel. All right, so let's just say I want to make a new event here. I'm going to make a new event. I'll call it blah, blah, blah. And I right click on here. I've got all sorts of things. Make an NPC attack the player. Print a blank line. Print a line of text. Print an object's name. Kill the player if they've been in the dark too long. Kill the player if they're in a particular location. Kill the player if they're not wearing something in a particular location. There's a lot of snippets here that you can just drop in, and Lantern will ask you, okay, what's the item of clothing? What's the location? It'll kind of ask you for the objects, and it'll write the code for you. So be aware of that. That is super, super helpful. Oh, and that applies to the checks too. There's tons of snippets, and if there's something that we need to add a snippet, we can easily add more snippets. Lantern will help you write your code. Now let's go to variables. Variables are just pieces of data that keep track of something in our program, like how much battery, what the player's health is, how much battery the player has left, whether or not they've done something, whether or not they've accomplished some sort of a task, right? And we can use that for scorekeeping. So Lantern has a whole bunch of built-in variables. But you can add your own. So I've got some here, these track whether the player has read a particular spell. So if they've read a particular spell, then I set this variable to true. Like then can Lumos, right? That's the name of, is the player allowed to use the Lumos spell, right? That's storing a value, 0 or 1. And if the player, it starts off 0, and I change it to 1 when the player reads the spells. So I have variables that I use for temporary storage and also for keeping track of what is going on in my game. So variables are a little bit different than in other programming languages. So variables in Lantern are global, which I know they say is bad, but this is mapping down to assembly language. So local variables aren't necessarily possible. When you declare a variable like this can Lumos variable, you can access it in any one of your functions or events or verb checks. So variables are global. You don't declare variables in your code. You declare variables over here on this tab. And you can also declare arrays. An array is just a block of variables, and these can be used to create, well, the most useful thing I could think of would be to create a path for an NPC to follow, a list of room numbers that that character is supposed to kind of wander around in. So if you're interested in that, watch the tutorial on how to create a path. But you're on guard. Well, now I don't want to mess up my project, but give the path a name, and then you can select the rooms and just add them to the path, and then click create, and you're done. Now this tab will save you a ton of time. So this is a place where you can put lists of commands, like test cases for your game. So let's see if this works. I'm going to type like look, let me type like south, down, look, I for inventory. So I just typed in 4 commands there. SD, look, and I. And they're separated by a comma in case you can't see that. Now, if I go up here to the test window and I run my project, and what happens if I type cheat? So now those are my commands. And if I hit enter, see now it actually executed all of those commands. So you can't go that way. You can't go that way. Look, inventory. So you can put a whole, if there's a whole, like, you're trying to test your game from start to finish, put the entire game walkthrough right here with all the commands separated by commas. And then in that little test window, you type cheat, and it'll bring up your walkthrough. So that way you don't have to sit there typing your game in over and over and over again. That will save you a ton of time. And I can't remember if there's like test 1 and test 2. Let's try that. Can I try test 1? I forgot. Oh, look at that. Like you can put different test cases. So test 1, test 2, and test 3. So put lists of commands here, and then you can bring these up and drop them into that terminal window when you test your game. Up here, you go to test, launch player, and that'll save you a ton of time running your game from start to finish. Default strings, don't mess with this. This is if you want to change the default messages that the game prints out. There's no reason you want to mess with this. Just skip it. This was for, I helped a gentleman write a project where the narrator, it was told from the point of view of an alien creature, and who barely understood English. So we wanted to be able to override all the messages so that it wasn't like this clash of voices between this alien and some, kind of computerized robotic narrator. So this is for overriding the built-in messages. We don't need to use this. Image resources. We don't need to use this. This is if you're writing an adventure game for the Sinclair Spectrum and you want to have graphics. We're not doing that in this class. But if you are not in my class and you are in fact like out there in internet land and you have a Spectrum and you want to do a graphics project, by all means have at it. I will help you. Whatever bugs show up, we'll bash on them and get graphics games going on. All right. And then finally, the review tab. This I use for reviewing student projects. It gives me statistics on a project, and it dumps out all of the descriptions here. I can drop this into Microsoft Word and check for spelling mistakes. I can verify how many, if the exits are correctly listed. So this gives me an idea of the size of the game and the quality of the writing. So yes, I have a way of looking in your projects to see what's going on. So number of rooms, that's a coincidence that maybe there's something wrong going on there. I got to look into that. So here I can see, hey, do you have scenery objects? How many initial descriptions have you put on things? How many functions did you write? Right? So this gives me a good sense of how much work went into your game. And external tools, we're not going to use that in this class, but this is where you can configure all of the stuff to, if you are building a game for a particular platform. So to get stuff on the disk for the Apple II, we need to select the location of Apple Commander, the Apple Commander jar. If you want to move stuff to an ADT Pro directory for copying the disk images, you can set that there. But we're not going to be using that in this class. So there it is from start to finish. So that's what's in here. We've got our welcome messages. This is where our objects are. We're going to set their properties. This is where we add verbs to our game. This is where we put checks on how those verbs get used. And the sentences work together with the functions. So we make functions to handle things in our games. And the sentences map commands that the player types to those functions. When the player types this, call a function. Events are functions that run after every successful command, and these are used for housekeeping, making things happen in your game, computing the score. You can use them for all that sort of stuff. Variables, pieces of data that store the state of your game that you can use in your functions, events, and checks. The testing tab, that is where you can put your walkthrough so you can easily pull it up in the test client. And then we're not really going to worry about the other 4 tabs. So that's what we got going on here. And then what else? I mean, since we're going through this stuff, then up here, if you wanted to build your program for a particular, your game for a particular program, you could do that up here, assuming that you've got your external tools configured correctly. And then, help. Yeah, so there's also commands up here. Code editor shortcuts. Yes, code editor. I almost forgot. There are all sorts of code editor shortcuts. So, and they're listed out here for you. And as if the snippets weren't enough, let's just go make an event, and I'll show you what I mean. There's an event. Okay. If I want an if statement, I can just type if and hit tab twice. And it expands to an if statement. What if I want an else statement? Tab. There we go. See, it just writes the code for me. What if I want to print a line of text? PR, tab. Right now. What if I want to print the name of a variable? Print the name of a variable. Print the name of some variable. I don't know, score. So there's all sorts of stuff in, and then for objects, let's see, like player, PL, you type player a lot, PL expands to player, .L, tab expands to off screen, equals, okay, if the player's location is off screen, OF, tab. So there's all of these things that you can speed code your game. Those are all listed up here in help in the code editor shortcuts. So PL plus tab expands to player. All of this stuff, you can just if you know that, you can just blast out code very quickly. So that is like super helpful right there. So there it is. There's the and that works in all of those windows too, where you write your functions. So that's it. So that's the interface. I think it is laid out pretty well, and it's easy to use. But if you have any questions about how to use it, then by all means, just ask me and I will help you.